Democracy, Bridging Facts and Norms.
My name is Kübler. I'm a professor of democracy research and public governance at the University of Zurich. I am also head of department at the Center for Democracy Studies in Aarau, and I'm currently the academic director of the National Center of Competence and Research and Challenges to Democracy in the 21st Century. So my academic past, before coming here, I was a professor for social policy and social planning at the University of Applied Science in Basel, and before that I had been assistant professor here at the Department for Swiss Politics, and before that I was a postdoc researcher at several institutions. I have spent the most of the time of my PhD and postdoc actually in Lausanne at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, where I was researching issues of public policies in urban areas, and especially metropolitan governance and the citizen perceptions of metropolitan governance.
Why have you chosen to do research in political science in the first place?
Well, I was always interested about the phenomenon of cities. That was my primary interest during my PhD time. I mean, why did I study political science is a different question, but I think that would lead us too far. But during my studies I became increasingly interested in cities and the phenomenon of cities and how citizens in cities behave, how they participate, how they cannot participate, what does it do to various groups living in a city to be affected by reconstruction, by urban policies and politics. And I got this job at the Federal Institute of Technology, where we studied various urban policy decision-making processes, and that's more or less how I became interested in the questions of governance. How can you, if you can, govern cities? How can you govern societies more broadly? So that's more or less my background.
And has it changed since you started becoming a researcher?
Oh yes, of course. I mean, it has been expanded. It has expanded in different ways. So of course, the topic you did during your PhD will never completely be behind you. It's like when you listen to music when you're 16, you always think, this has been interesting, and you have interesting memories. And I never completely stopped doing that. To the contrary, there's waves. I came back to these topics. It has changed a bit because also the conditions have changed. For instance, less than cities now. We're looking at metropolitan areas. We're looking at metropolitan areas also in different countries. So we have started a collaboration with people in China, for instance, where they have completely different scopes of problems and scopes of challenges for governance in the cities. So the topic has changed, of course, but there is always some relationship to what I did already during the PhD. Then, of course, other topics have added to this. We have started doing things on representative bureaucracy. I have increasingly developed the focus on the question of the democracy and governance, and how changing forms of governance affect legitimacy of policymaking, how they affect the possibilities of citizens to participate in policy decisions. So it has developed in different directions, the work I am doing.
And is it also related to this evolution to changes in the way academia functions?
That's a good question. I think it is related to the ways in which the debate in the field develops. So, for instance, during my PhD thesis I had a bit of a look at how changing state-society relationships and collaborating with between states and NGOs changes the ways in which citizens can participate. But this was not the major focus of my PhD, but I had a look at a bit of the literature and so on, and noticed the questions that are at the forefront of the academic debate. And now coming back to this topic after a couple of years, now this is the main thing that we're looking at in our project of the NCCR Democracy now. I realized that the debate has changed, and the questions that were open at the time of my PhD have now been more or less answered, but there are new questions. So, of course, if you do research and you know the state of the debate, you look at the questions that are open, and those open questions, of course, they change during the time. You also have sometimes clear answers to old questions, so you go further and have new questions. I think it's related to the way in which the scientific debate is going on, the literature is going on, and how the debate evolves. That's also linked to to that. Of course, then this is for the substance of some of the topics that I've been working on for a couple of years. Then other topics add on to this, and this is, for instance, the one on representative bureaucracy, which is also one of my major personal fields of interest now. This is linked to funding opportunities. I mean, there was a funding opportunity for a couple of years ago, and we submitted the project because I found that was interesting without having worked on it before. And we got the project, and we got opportunities to employ people who were pursuing these projects, and they have been working it. So you work with them on things, and you become more or less knowledgeable in the field, and then there are new funding opportunities, and you start having teams or groups of people whom you work with, who also continue working on this. So your topic, that the teams expand, and the number of topics that you work with also expands together with the way in which the people you work with actually evolve and develop.
As you mentioned, you're the director of the NCCR Democracy, which is a huge project in Switzerland, and it's arriving to the end now after 12 years. And is a project that brings together a variety of approaches to democracy studies. And you're also directing the Center for Democracy in Aarau, where political scientists, but also researchers in law and education science work on various projects, and sometimes together, always related to democracy. What is your experience in working at the juncture of different academic disciplines?
I mean, you're right, this is the interdisciplinarity between communication science and political sciences, and also between law is part of my daily job for the last has been part of my daily job for the last 8 years. But before that, I was always involved in projects together with other disciplines at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Of course, political science is only something as an add-on to other disciplines, and we've been working with architects, with engineers, with regional planners, also with public health specialists. And then I was involved at one time in a project together with forest engineers. So I have a long experience and past of interdisciplinary collaboration, and I mean, it is time consuming, that's right, it is, but it's fun also, because you're confronted with people who look at similar or the same questions even that you do, but who have a different disciplinary approach, who have a different method, who have a different, let's say, background of literature, of debate. So this is confronting that with your own discipline is I think very enriching. And I think in the NCCR Democracy, for instance, after 12 years now that we've been collaborating with our colleagues from communication sciences, I think I now can say that we've learned from them. So we have learned on on what the media are, and to think about more critically about the media, for instance, and not take them just as actors who transmit information, but who transform them information at the same time, because they have internal logics of organizations and of corporate actors who also need to exist, who need to survive in an increasingly difficult market environment. That's for one thing. So there is an opening to a new world of theories, to a new world of questions that we would not have come across, at least not as deeply as that, if we hadn't collaborated with them. And then, of course, there is methods also. I mean, a method of content analysis. We've been doing that, of course, I would say a bit in an amateur way, but looking at this is daily business, and this is the core method that our colleagues from communication science, of course, use. So looking at how they do it and how you can do content analysis in a rigorous way is also a very enlightening and very enriching. So I think that has been a very positive experience. But beyond positive experience for me personally, which is not very relevant why you should do interdisciplinary research, I also think it brings your field further. If you take my own field, I mean, this is my own field, this is urban politics and policy and governance. No one in the field has looked at the media the way we have. And if we had not had the opportunity to work with our colleagues in communication science, we would probably not have thought about looking or involving the media as a particular actor for urban politics and governance. And I think this makes our own research, even though we have not become communication scientists in the meantime, but it adds an innovative aspect to our own field. And this is increasingly rewarded as well, because our publications bring aspects to the field that other peoples have not thought about, and this is, let's say, draws attention in the field, and this is also good for young scholars who are working in the field, because I mean, if you have people doing a PhD on urban politics and governance, there is a lot that has been said, and what is there that can be said within the field. So bringing a new points of view, a new maybe link to other using different methods that we borrow from communication scientists, for instance, has also helped these young scholars to establish themselves in a field that is increasingly competitive as well. So I think it's really innovative, and I think it's a good way of getting new research idea, because good research is also very dependent on researchers' creativity. And if you always swim in the same pool, you don't have new and creative ideas. But if you look across the fence, you can have new ideas and pursue them, and also contribute to taking your own field further.
That's interesting, because I think the field of political science and the sub-disciplines of political science are already very numerous. And I'm wondering, here you're talking a lot about the importance of the interaction with media science, which is a bit out of the field of political science traditionally. And I'm wondering, what do you think about which interdisciplinarity can be useful to what project? In a way, how do you take out the idea to work with a certain other discipline and not with another?
Well, I mean, the NCCR democracy was this was a requirement by the National Science Foundation. So it was not out of a question that we said, well, we need new methods, we need to start collaboration with these people. But as the NCCR went along, of course, we got to know each other, and we were mutually interested in each other's questions. So this grew together. But it's not a rational, let's say, process of planning of how can you deal mostly with how can you deal in the most intelligent way with a particular project or so on. So this was more, let's say, contingent. And I think interdisciplinary collaboration is very much contingent also on whether you get along with people from the other disciplines. I have had to work with people from other disciplines because we could only deal with the question in an interdisciplinary way, and it has been absolutely frustrating and not at all rewarding. So it also depends a lot on how you get along with people from the other disciplines, and whether they are sufficiently open-minded, and whether you can find a way of communicating with each other. So again, I think it's very often contingent on funding opportunities, on personal relationships with researchers from other disciplines.
So that means disciplines as such don't have borders between them, but if you find the right people and people you can talk to and engage with on a project.
I mean, I think disciplines do have borders, and disciplines are increasingly tight, because I mean, there is also a drawback to interdisciplinary research. You will have difficulties finding journal outlets, good ones, because these are always disciplinary, except for a few, let's say, topics or fields which have become their own interdisciplinary field. Take the example of environmental studies. So you have people from engineering, from natural sciences, but also from social science or economists that can work in the field of the environment, and look at different aspects of environmental policy and there you have internationally very well renowned journals in which people can publish different disciplines, and you have no problems finding reviewers looking at these things. But if you're in a field that pre-exists, which has not a long experience of interdisciplinary collaboration, such as ours, Democracy Studies, for instance, the problems that you have is that you will, when you want to publish your stuff in a political science journal, the reviewers will say, well, political science bit of it is nice, but just skip and drop all these communication and stuff. Nobody's interested in this. And another reviewer from communication science would say, well, this communication bit is nice, but why mess around with all these politics? So it's difficult to actually evolve within disciplinary structures, especially when you have interdisciplinary topics that are new, and interdisciplinary collaborations which people are not used to. And so if you want to make a brilliant career, you still need to publish in the top disciplinary journals, and there it is, of course, mainstream non-interdisciplinary research, which is more rewarded than interdisciplinary stuff.
I'd have a last question to interdisciplinary, because you have this very unique profile of having done your own interdisciplinary research and now managing the interdisciplinary project of the NCCR Democracy. Is there a difference between those two positions of doing research and being more on this directing overview of the entire project?
Well, I mean, the question is always, to what extent can you actually manage scientific work? So, I mean, I was used to joke and say, well, the worst people to collaborate with are university professors, because they never do what you want them to do. And I think this is part of the game of managing a research program independently from whether it's interdisciplinary or not. So I think what you can do as a director of such a big project is to create a context or an environment where people can work and use their talents to do the work they can do. So the less directive you are, the better actually the things will work. Of course, you will then have to find ways in which you try to direct the activities in a direction where the sponsoring agencies are then satisfied. But there is limits to what you can do, and you can only I think provide opportunities for people to do what they can do best, and then maybe bring them together or create opportunities where they can meet and then find out themselves that they can actually go along with each other quite well, or it could be interesting to explore additional questions and so on. So in this sense, it is different than actually doing the interdisciplinary work. I see my position more as a position of enabling people to do what they can do best and not to tell them what to do. And in interdisciplinary work, when you do it, sometimes you need to maybe be more clear about what can be done and what cannot be done, because there are expectations from other disciplines that cannot be fulfilled. Typically, if you work with engineers or natural scientists, and they see that you're a political scientist, they think what you will do is find ways in which to convince politicians that the solutions they have found for the problem will actually be decided, funded and applied. And then there you have to tell them, no, this is a completely wrong expectations. And I always say engineers and political scientists are actually two disciplines that do not go well together, because engineers want to solve problems, whereas social scientists actually want to find problems. And so there you need to sometimes to be more directive, to set clearer limits and say, well, no, this is something we cannot do, and if you want to collaborate with us, this is the way we would like you to frame our questions, or this is the way you need to understand how we work, and so on. So this is more in the direct contact. It's often more conflictual than it is to mention when you are responsible for the whole thing.
So you're coming to my next question. We have a perfect transition. In your own research, you're also very active in a project of evaluation of public policies and political bodies in Switzerland and elsewhere. And the Center for Democracy in Aarau has also recently become co-responsible for the post-popular Vox surveys in the country, which are very important in politics in Switzerland. What do you think is the impact of this research on the functioning of democracy in Switzerland?
Well, I think this, if you're referring to this particular project, I think it's very important, because that's also why it has been going on for such a long time. I think the first one have started in the mid-80s. There have been post-vote analysis and surveys, and it has become a tradition now. So it's really an institution that we're taking over here from another consortium. And I think also, if you look at the way in which it's received in the media, I mean, it is important for the political actors, be they opponents or promoters of particular laws that are voted on. I think it has become important in that they can see what the reasons were and how the citizens and what proportion of citizens received arguments that were made in favor or against a particular proposal, and also helps, for instance, the government, if a proposal was turned down by the majority of the citizens, to rework it in a way that it becomes acceptable. So it can help improve, let's say, the decision-making process, and I think it's actually a service of our political science, of our discipline, to the democratic institutions. And I think it's a very important service, and I think it also is perceived as a useful service. If it was not, it would have been stopped a long time ago. And it is also important to do this as a public research institution, because if we don't do it, others will do it anyway, and they will, those actors who will have the funds to hire research institutes to actually do such an analysis, they would have an advantage over the others. So typically this would be the business associations and organized interests who would have vast advantage, they already have now, over others who are not as well organized and do not have as many funds as the business interests. So our project is not only good for the government, but it's also good for creating a level play field for actors who are moving in, who are working or trying to act in these fields, to provide them with background knowledge on their field, and which help them actually to pursue their strategies, whichever they are. So I think it's a very good, it's a very helpful project, and the challenge has become increasingly difficult to actually do this in a way that is methodologically sound, because in general survey research has been confronted with many difficulties in methodology, and I think it has been high time to improve the methodology. And then now the federal government together, the Federal Office of Statistics actually is very much involved in this new project, and I think if it was us or somebody else who had done it, I think it's important to really improve the methodology and to be sure that we do not just simply n'importe quoi, but we really do it in a way that is methodologically sound.
So my next question was about if there is an impact on real politics, what are our responsibilities? And I guess that's one, to do sound research that is methodologically perfect, or at least as good as possible. Are there other responsibilities of political scientists?
Of political scientists, there are other responsibilities. I mean, there are lots of, in the political debate, there are lots of arguments that are thrown around that political actors throw at each other. And sometimes political science can check, can say, well, is this true? Is this not true? For instance, there is a big debate in local governments now about mergers of municipalities. And what does it do? What does it not do? And there are lots of arguments that are made in favor or against it, and for instance, that municipal mergers would lead to more efficient services, and political science research or research in public management has shown that's not the case. So it depends, basically. It's not a thumb rule that it's always, or for instance, some people say that municipal mergers are undemocratic, or big government is no good because it's less responsive to the citizens, and political science research has shown that this is the case. So the smaller the municipality, the higher the participation. So there are some arguments that we can show that there is scientific evidence going in direction or against some of the arguments, and I think our role can be to help make the debate more evidence-based. And I fundamentally believe in the values of Aufklärung and enlightenment, and I think this is our part. We have a part to play there in society, and say, well, there are debates on different issues. Things are unsure. We can provide some evidence about some things that in order to make the debate more evidence-based, and I think that's a role we have to play, or we can play.
So concretely, that means that you would choose to study topics that are used as arguments in debates, or
no? I mean, there's a different. I would not simply orient my own research on topics that are of current, let's say, preoccupation to the public, because this changes so quickly that you would be constantly running behind some arguments that are thrown around in the public debate. But sometimes you have results, you have evidence that were gathered in a different context, but that can make sense and that can speak to arguments that are currently debated. And there you could raise your voice and say, well, these arguments are currently debated. We have done research, not for the purpose of this particular debate, but we have done research, we have evidence, and we can say, well, yes or no, this is like it is.
So then would you say that the main role of political scientists is to be these kind of experts in political debates and ring the bell when something is not holding in public debates? Or that they can also be more engaged as citizens and make maybe more normative statements about what would be good or not?
I mean, there's a fine line between providing evidence for something and saying, well, things are good or not good. I mean, I think normative statement as political scientists should always be based on scientific evidence. Now, philosophical logic can also be scientific evidence, and there might be a normative analysis that comes to by normative analysis you would come to the conclusion that I don't know, this and that institution is good for democracy or it is not, and then you can say it. I mean, if you're speaking out in public as an expert, you should always be congruent with that role as an expert, and the role of an expert is to base your opinions on scientific evidence. Otherwise, you're not an expert anymore, and you become a political actor. And this is something that we should also apply some self-restriction on it. And often, if you communicate with journalists, people ask you questions which you cannot answer and which you cannot extrapolate from evidence, but then you have maybe some political opinion and you are maybe tempted to give an answer in that sense, but you should simply remind yourself as the role of the expert and what it is, namely to base yourself on scientific evidence. And I think this is something one should really stick to.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brought to you by DemocracyNet.eu.